In a flash, everything changed when I heard my husband's angry voice on the phone. He yelled, "Why do you always fall apart when I need you?" He didn't seem to care that I was in the hospital because our baby was in danger. He complained about being hungry and waiting for my cooking while I was stuck in the hospital. He said he'd had enough and was going out to eat with his parents, leaving me to figure out how to get home on my own. His anger made me feel even worse, especially because I was scared for our unborn baby and worried that I couldn't protect them. I used to be a dedicated cosmetic salesperson known for my hard work and success. I had many awards and loved my job. Meeting my husband felt like a dream come true, and our relationship quickly turned into marriage. When I found out I was pregnant, I had to make a tough choice. Leave my job to avoid the risk of miscarriage, thinking about what was best for our family's future. As my pregnancy progressed, my husband's support seemed to disappear. What used to be excitement turned into frustration. Simple tasks became overwhelming for me, and I struggled to meet his expectations. He would ask, "Where's my lunch?" and then criticize the simple sandwiches I made, saying I couldn't handle smells. He dismissed my difficulties with, "Pregnancy is not an illness," making me feel alone in my struggles. This was so different from the man I had fallen in love with. He stopped coming to doctor's visits and showed less concern for the household chores that were becoming too much for me. Our home, once filled with love and respect, felt like a constant battle as I tried to protect both myself and our baby. I hoped that we'd eventually find our way back to understanding each other. Maybe he's just tired and stressed from mentoring a new person at work. I kept telling myself that once the baby is here, his busy schedule will ease up, and we'll settle into a good routine as a family. I reassured myself, whispering "okay," while gently touching my growing belly, trying to stay positive despite the challenges with my changing body and our strained relationship. Things between my husband and me haven't improved. On top of that, my in-laws have started showing up unannounced, which has added to my stress. They criticize the cleanliness of our home and worry about how we'll manage with the baby, but they still expect me to serve them food right away. I feel overwhelmed and unprepared, and their visits always end with disappointment. My husband never stands up for me and seems to agree with their criticisms, making me feel like I'm not good enough. One day, while heavily pregnant and sent out to buy groceries, I collapsed from exhaustion. I woke up in the hospital, having passed out from overdoing it, but thankfully, our baby was fine. The doctor said I needed to rest for a few days. I saw missed calls from my husband and thought he must have been worried. But when I called him back, instead of relief or concern, he greeted me with anger. "Where have you been?" he demanded harshly, as if my health and our baby's safety didn't matter to him. His cold words made me shiver. I tried to explain, "I'm sorry I collapsed at the store and had to come to the hospital. They have me on IV fluids and want me to stay here for a few days." But his response was unfeeling and impatient. "You collapse and I'm supposed to care. Why don't you answer when I call?" "You're so slow," he said, making me feel even worse. I couldn't stand the thought of our baby being exposed to this negativity. I pleaded, "Please stop yelling. It's not good for the baby," but he ignored me. He continued, "We're starving here waiting for your awful cooking, and you're just relaxing in the hospital." It was clear he wanted to go out to eat with his parents and leave me on my own, even though I was in this condition. His anger and lack of concern were overwhelming. I ended the call, feeling completely alone and heartbroken. As I returned to my hospital room, tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. In that vulnerable moment, a familiar and comforting voice reached out to me. "Are you okay?" I looked up to see Helen, a customer I had grown close to from my days as a cosmetic salesperson, offering me a towel. Seeing her brought me immense relief and warmth. "Helen, it's really you. I'm so glad you remember me." Our unexpected reunion felt like a beacon of kindness and human connection during my darkest hour. Helen was more than just a customer to me. After a tough divorce, she had lost her confidence and stopped wearing makeup altogether. I remember approaching her at the cosmetics counter and offering to help her try some makeup. The change in her wasn't just physical. It was a boost to her self-esteem and a step toward emotional healing. Over time, Helen became a friend, not just a client. But then, 5 years before I left my job, Helen stopped coming in, and I often wondered what had happened to her. Now, here she was, providing support when I needed it the most. "I had been hoping to reconnect with you, Helen," I said. "I was surprised to find out you had left your old job when I went looking for you." "I'm sorry for just showing up out of the blue," she replied. "I had been working abroad. I run a business overseas, and it's been very busy. I hadn't had a chance to enjoy summer or good food in ages. So once things settled down, I decided to come back. And believe it or not, right after, I tried to find you," Helen said with a laugh that made the situation a little lighter. "I ended up here with appendicitis. It's just in the early stages, so medication should handle it. If this had happened while I was still abroad, the treatment cost would have been sky high, so in a way, I'm glad it happened here." Her optimism and warm smile were contagious, and this surprise reunion cheered me up. We happily reminisced about old times. As our conversation went on, Helen, with her kind smile, gently asked, "You don't have to share if you're not comfortable, but I noticed you seemed upset earlier. What's going on?" Feeling I could trust Helen, not just as a former customer but as a real friend, I opened up about my troubles with my husband and in-laws. "I'm really worried about bringing my baby into this environment. I'm afraid they'll be treated the same way I am. And without my job, the thought of living independently, especially with a child, feels overwhelming." To my surprise, Helen made a truly generous offer. "I actually have an apartment you could use. I manage a few properties as part of a project I started with land I inherited. It's a cozy 2-bedroom with a separate bathroom, soundproof walls, and it's in a safe neighborhood close to supermarkets and a police station. You wouldn't need to pay a deposit right now, and you can start paying rent whenever you're ready. It's a really good deal. What do you think?" Helen's excitement and sincerity were so genuine that I couldn't help but laugh in disbelief. "Are you sure you can offer it at such great terms?" I asked, overwhelmed by her kindness. "Absolutely," Helen said. "I trust you'll take good care of the place, and I think it's important to support each other in tough times. You're more than welcome to stay there," she assured me with a warm smile. Helen's unexpected kindness felt like a ray of hope. It wasn't just an offer of a place to stay, but a chance for a fresh start. Her generous gesture was something I couldn't refuse, so with heartfelt gratitude, I accepted. Days later, once the doctors gave me the all clear, I left the hospital and moved straight into the apartment Helen had set up for me. She had arranged everything effortlessly over the phone, showing incredible generosity. I didn't go back to the home I shared with my husband. Instead, I embraced this fresh start in Helen's cozy and welcoming apartment. Although I felt a bit guilty about not paying rent right away, Helen just laughed it off, telling me not to worry. While my husband was at work, I went back to our old home to pick up my things. It felt strange and empty, much like how I felt inside. Helen's support went beyond just offering the apartment. She connected me with a lawyer who had helped her before, and this solidified my decision to pursue a divorce. The lawyer's encouragement gave me hope, and with each hospital visit confirming the health of my baby, my resolve grew stronger. One day, as I left the hospital, I was alarmed to see my husband waiting for me. I panicked and tried to leave quickly, but my pregnancy made it hard to move fast. He confronted me about the lawyer and our living situation, gripping my arm tightly. I stood my ground, insisting that any discussions about the divorce, compensation, or child support should be handled through the lawyer. I refused to return home with him. As he tried to force me to go back, a young woman stepped in to help. Rebecca, as she introduced herself, immediately stood in front of me, showing clear protection. Her familiar interaction with my husband George revealed the underlying tension. Rebecca firmly told George he couldn't take me against my will, and even threatened to call the police. Her determination and the mention of the police were enough to shift the situation, giving me a glimmer of hope and the strength to assert myself. Seeing Rebecca's seriousness, George looked frightened and quickly left. I felt a wave of relief that nearly made my legs buckle. Rebecca immediately came to my side to support me. "Are you okay?" she asked, and I apologized, feeling overwhelmed by relief. Rebecca quickly called a taxi for me, insisting on making sure I got home safely. Despite feeling bad for causing her trouble, she reassured me it was no problem. When I told her my address, she was surprised to learn that I lived just below her. It was a happy coincidence that we were neighbors. Rebecca, cheerful and kind, turned out to be a new employee at George's workplace. She had reported his inappropriate behavior, which led to him being removed as her mentor. George was known for his lack of empathy toward female employees, often making insensitive comments about personal issues like menstruation and marriage. Rebecca shared that George's behavior wasn't just a problem at work. I had experienced it firsthand during my pregnancy. 3 weeks after meeting Rebecca, we had become good friends, enjoying dinners together. She shared that George had been moved to a subsidiary company after multiple complaints and problems at work. Interestingly, Rebecca was Helen's daughter, the same Helen who owned the apartment I was staying in. George had previously bragged about handling Helen's account, but his poor behavior led to his demotion. Helen had pushed for George's transfer after learning about his actions both at work and toward me. Rebecca, determined to address workplace issues on her own merit, had only acted after realizing my connection to her mother. Helen had encouraged Rebecca to gather and present evidence against George, which led to his transfer. With George's reduced income and increased workload, his position had changed significantly. Helen, drawing on her experience, advised me to stay firm and not be swayed by George's attempts to gain sympathy, which was incredibly reassuring. After I decided to divorce George, he tried to contact me through the lawyer, expressing how tough work was and how much he missed me. He even apologized and asked me to come back, but I remained resolute in my decision to divorce, supported by Helen. George had no choice but to accept the divorce and agree to the terms for child support and damages. As time went on, I faced a new challenge with my in-laws, especially my father-in-law, who was overly excited about the baby being a boy. I sensed trouble brewing, and it wasn't long before my in-laws made their move. One day, while I was heading out, my father-in-law grabbed my arm. He had followed Rebecca, thinking he would confront her, but then saw me and demanded that I give up my baby once born, claiming the baby was the family's heir. Despite my efforts to free myself, his grip was too strong. Just then, Rebecca's firm voice demanded he let me go. In a swift motion, she used a judo technique to throw him. Rebecca, a top-ranked judoka with national titles, had mastered judo to protect herself and her mother during difficult times. She confronted my father-in-law, criticizing him for ignoring George's actions and trying to interfere in my life. She defended my right to start over and made it clear that their meddling was unacceptable. The sound of approaching sirens revealed that Rebecca had called for help before coming to my rescue. My mother-in-law, who had been waiting in a nearby car, watched quietly as the police arrived and took both her and my father-in-law away. My father-in-law was arrested, and after some reflection, my mother-in-law decided to divorce him and start a new life in the countryside. George tried to persuade his mother to let him come with her, saying he was fed up with his job and the family drama, but she firmly rejected him. Through the lawyer, my mother-in-law sent her apologies and left some money as a gesture of goodwill. Helen explained that it's common for people to feel lost after leaving a marriage and that the money was likely her way of apologizing and supporting my son's future. I was surprised by her support, given her past behavior, but grateful for her attempt to make amends. After finalizing the divorce, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. My mother-in-law chose to live in the countryside, preferring solitude over staying with George. When my father-in-law was released from custody, he found that the house had been demolished by my mother-in-law before she left. He ended up moving in with George, which only led to more problems and eventually caused George to resign from his job due to a damaged reputation. Despite the upheaval, child support payments continued to come in reliably, likely managed by Helen and the lawyer. Rebecca was recognized at work for her efforts and became a project leader, earning admiration from her colleagues. Helen's projects, including women-only properties and housing for foreigners, were thriving. As for me, once my son was old enough, I planned to return to work. Helen had offered me a position at a new high-end cosmetics store she was opening. She continued to support me and showed affection for my son, as if he were her own grandchild. Rebecca also made time to visit us. Both of them reminded me of the strength and kindness that had carried me through the toughest times. I was determined to be as strong and protective of my son as these incredible women had been for me.